She was one of the most tragic and controversial figures in the history of English royalty. Catherine Howard, the fifth wife of the feared Henry VIII, arrived at court as a young woman full of life and beauty, but also with a past she tried to hide. Unlike her predecessors, Catherine was neither a foreign princess nor a noblewoman with political experience. She was barely a teenager when she was thrust into the heart of England's most dangerous seat of power. The aging, ailing king, hungry for affection, became instantly obsessed with her, calling her his rose without a thorn. But what seemed like a fairy tale quickly turned into a nightmare. Surrounded by intrigue, enemies, and secrets, Catherine was swept up in a storm she helped ignite. In this video, I'll take you through 15 surprising facts about the life of Catherine Howard, a life marked by desire, recklessness, and betrayal. Get ready to discover how a young queen went from being the king's favorite to losing her head, literally. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our videos. Without further ado, let's begin. Born for court, raised in the shadows. Catherine Howard was born around 1523, although the exact date remains a mystery to historians. She was the daughter of Lord Edmund Howard and Joyce Culpeper, and on her father's side, she belonged to one of the most powerful families in the kingdom, the Howards. Her uncle was none other than Thomas Howard, 3rd Duke of Norfolk, a key figure at the Tudor court, shrewd and ambitious, who had already placed his niece Anne Boleyn on the throne years earlier. Although noble by birth, Catherine grew up with limited resources due to her father's financial troubles, which deeply affected her upbringing. Still, her last name carried prestige, and the Howard family saw in her a useful piece in the courtly game of alliances, just another instrument to increase their influence with the unpredictable Henry VIII. A neglected education. During her childhood, she was sent to live under the care of the Duchess of Norfolk, Agnes Tilney, at her residence in Lambeth. This place, far from being a model boarding house for noble ladies, was a loose and disorderly environment. The young wards slept in communal rooms, without the discipline expected for their rank, and under poor supervision from their guardians. Nights were filled with whispered conversations, muffled laughter, and even behaviors considered improper in a society ruled by strict moral and religious codes. It was in this setting, more neglectful than deliberately corrupt, where Catherine developed a lively and affectionate personality, but also a lack of awareness about the social and political consequences of her actions. An inappropriate relationship with her music tutor. In this environment, still very young, Catherine began a relationship with Henry VIII, her music tutor. He was older and of lower status, making the relationship not only inappropriate, but potentially scandalous. Contemporary sources indicate that Mannix played more than just the lute. He also stirred the emotions and touched the body of his young pupil. Although Catherine would later claim the relationship had never been fully consummated, surviving testimonies and letters suggest a level of intimacy beyond what was acceptable for a maiden of noble blood. Years later, this relationship would be unearthed by her enemies and used as evidence of alleged unchastity prior to her marriage to the king, a sin that, for a Queen of England, could be equated with treason. A love that doomed her. Not long after, Catherine began a more serious relationship with Francis Derham, a young man also connected to the household of the Duchess. Unlike Mannix, Derham seemed to have more formal intentions. Between them, there were words that, in the legal and religious context of the time, could be interpreted as vows of engagement, or even a de facto marriage. They referred to each other as husband and wife, shared rooms, and some documents suggest he entrusted her with money, as if planning a future together. Catherine, still a teenager, was far from understanding the implications of such promises. What seemed at the time like a youthful romance would, years later, become the weapon that sealed her fate, the lady who drove the king mad. It was in 1540 that Catherine Howard entered the royal court as a lady-in-waiting to Queen Anne of Cleves. Her arrival came at a moment of great tension. The marriage between Henry VIII and Anne had been disastrous from the beginning. The king found her unattractive, and the union had not been consummated. In this climate of dissatisfaction, Catherine, radiant, charismatic, and significantly younger, quickly caught the king's eye. Her grace and vivacity stood in stark contrast to the diplomatic coldness of the German queen. The aging king, frustrated in his marriage and eager to revive his sense of masculinity, became infatuated with young Catherine. Whispers began to circulate through the palace halls. Whether intentionally or guided by the ambitions of her relatives, Catherine quickly became the king's new favorite. Her glorious and tragic destiny was now set in motion. The Rose Without Thorns. King Henry VIII, now well into middle age, was deeply taken by Catherine Howard's youthful beauty. He described her as his rose without thorns, a phrase that reflected not only his romantic idealization, but also his yearning for an innocent companion, free from the political complications that had plagued his previous marriages. To him, Catherine represented purity, unspoiled beauty, and the revival of his waning masculinity. That expression, however, would take on a bitter meaning in time, as the idyllic image the king had projected onto her would soon be shattered by the echoes of her past and the choices she made in the present. But in those early months, Catherine seemed to have captivated the King of England with a force rivaling that of Anne Boleyn in her days of glory. To Henry, his young bride was not just another consort, she was a new chance at happiness and virility. Wedding the king. On July 28, 1540, the very same month his marriage to Anne of Cleves was annulled, Henry VIII married Catherine Howard. She was barely 16 or 17 years old, still a teenager, while the king was already 49 and suffering from health problems, including an ulcerated leg and a volatile temper. The physical contrast between them was obvious, but the king didn't seem to mind. This private ceremony, lacking the grandeur of his previous weddings, reflected his desire to marry Catherine quickly and quietly. Discretion, however, didn't stop the court and the kingdom from buzzing with rumors. Many viewed the union as rushed and driven more by lust than political strategy or diplomacy. For Catherine, however, this marriage marked a dramatic rise, from lady-in-waiting to Queen of England in just a few weeks. Catherine is proclaimed queen. On August 8, 1540, Catherine Howard was proclaimed queen consort in a public ceremony that officially established her as the king's wife. With all the grandeur of the Tudor court, she was introduced as the new flower of the realm, and celebrations and banquets were held in her honor. The entire court now revolved around the young queen, who reveled in the luxury, extravagant gowns and jewels she had once only dreamed of. Her charming smile and cheerful demeanor earned her the favor of many courtiers, though it also sparked envy in others. But beneath the splendor of the ceremony and the brilliance of her crown, Catherine lacked the preparation and political savvy needed to navigate the treacherous web of Tudor court intrigue. Her inexperience, combined with her unconventional past, would become looming threats to her reign. Dangerous favors at court. During her brief reign, Catherine used her influence to benefit members of her family and former acquaintances, actions that soon raised suspicions. Among those favored was Francis Derham, her former lover, whom she appointed as her personal secretary. His appointment was as unexpected as it was reckless. While many were unaware of the details of their past relationship, Derham's rise within the Queen's intimate circle caused unease. Some viewed it as an offense to the dignity of the position. Others began to whisper. In the Tudor court, where every step could be watched and every word distorted, this decision would be seen not just as mismanaged favoritism, but as a direct threat to the Queen's reputation. Catherine, young and perhaps eager to protect those from her past, failed to grasp the implications of her actions. The secret romance with Culpeper. It was also during this time that Catherine began a secret relationship with Thomas Culpeper, a courtier close to the king, which marked the beginning of her downfall. Culpeper was handsome, ambitious, and held the king's trust. The exact nature of his relationship with Catherine remains a matter of debate among historians, but documentary evidence reveals nighttime meetings arranged with the help of Jane Boleyn, Lady Rochford, the sister-in-law of the late Anne Boleyn. These meetings were carried out under strict discretion, though not discreetly enough. For Catherine, Culpeper perhaps represented an emotional escape, or maybe an irresistible attraction born of boredom or desire. Whatever the case, their relationship, even without conclusive proof of consummated adultery, was enough for the Queen's enemies to begin building the case that would eventually lead to her ruin before the king. A letter that changed everything. In late 1541, Catherine Howard's stability as queen began to crumble after an anonymous letter was sent directly to Thomas Cranmer, Archbishop of Canterbury. The contents of the message were explosive. It claimed that before her marriage to the king, Catherine had engaged in improper conduct and illicit relationships. Cranmer, fully aware of the gravity of the accusation, chose to proceed with extreme caution. He informed the king via a confidential letter, which Henry VIII read during Mass, unaware to all others in court of what was about to unfold. The emotional impact was so intense that Henry temporarily left the service. His initial reaction was not anger, but disbelief. He struggled to accept that his young wife, whom he had so idealized, might have betrayed him. However, what began as a rumor soon escalated into an official investigation, conducted discreetly by members of the Royal Council. Confessions under torture. The first decisive action was the arrest of Francis Derham in November 1541, whose confession under torture unleashed a series of revelations that sealed Catherine's fate. Although it was argued that the relationship with Catherine had occurred before she became queen, that defense did not protect her. It only implicated her further. Under extreme pressure, he admitted to having had relations with her when they both lived under the roof of Agnes Tilney, and that he had later been brought back into the Queen's household. More damning still, he pointed to Thomas Culpeper as her rival and current lover, stating that he had seen signs of an ongoing affair between them. This accusation changed the course of the investigation. What initially seemed like a youthful indiscretion now took the form of active betrayal committed during her marriage to the king. The Tudor machinery of punishment had begun to move with relentless force. The king's reaction. Upon learning of the confessions, Henry VIII was utterly devastated. Chroniclers described his response as an emotional breakdown, accompanied by outbursts of fury and grief. For days, the monarch remained isolated, unable to face the scale of what had occurred. His already fragile health deteriorated under the weight of the stress. Though Henry initially refused to believe in her guilt, he could not ignore the testimonies, intercepted letters, and mounting interrogations. His pain turned into resolve, and the monarch chose the only path his wounded pride and absolute power could accept: exemplary justice. A law made to condemn her. Parliament, in agreement with the king, passed an unprecedented law that considered it high treason for a queen consort to hide her sexual past prior to marriage. The most disturbing aspect of this legal measure was its retroactive nature. It applied directly to the case of Catherine Howard, a clear sign that her fate was sealed even before she was formally tried. This legislation was drafted swiftly and precisely, aimed at punishing and preventing future humiliations for the crown. From the Tudor authorities' perspective, the king's honor had to be preserved at any cost. Catherine was never summoned to trial, nor allowed to defend herself under fair conditions. For the legal system of the time, her behavior alone was sufficient proof of treason. The death of a queen. On February 13, 1542, Catherine Howard was executed at the Tower of London at barely 19 years old. The most vivid accounts from that moment come from witnesses who claim that, the night before her death, Catherine asked for a block so she could practice how to place her head on the scaffold. She wanted to make sure she wouldn't falter, to die with dignity, knowing all eyes would be upon her. This tragic, almost theatrical image has endured as a symbol of the collapse of a young woman who rose too quickly in a ruthless court. At dawn, she was led to Tower Green, the very place where her cousin Anne Boleyn had been executed 2 years earlier. With a calm voice, Catherine accepted her fate and asked for prayers. The executioner's blade fell cleanly, ending a life marked by recklessness, vulnerability, and the merciless rules of absolute power. Her body was buried without ceremony in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula at the Tower of London, like so many other victims of Henry VIII's wrath. Thank you for staying with us until the end of the video. Give us a like and subscribe to the channel for more historical content.